Yo, how's it going, everybody? So I found this article on Polygon, and it states that Square Enix abandoned the future of Final Fantasy in a 15-year-old spin-off, the last Final Fantasy confident enough to be itself. So let's check out what this article is about. Long before Final Fantasy 16 launched to middling reviews, there's been ongoing talk about the future of Final Fantasy from Square Enix and longtime followers of the series alike. And every time I see it, I wonder why that future seems so uncertain when Square Enix already came close to getting it right back in 2011. Final Fantasy Type O, a spin-off set in the world of Final Fantasy 13, struck an almost perfect balance of following trends and innovating without losing sight of itself. It was an ideal pattern for the future, yet Square Enix never used it again. Yeah, so that's actually really interesting. I know that I also wondered why Square Enix didn't follow up with Final Fantasy Type O. It was really good. It was a lot of fun. I played it when it first came out for the PSP, and then I played it again when the remaster came out for the PlayStation 3 or PlayStation 4. I can't really remember. And I liked the interaction between all the characters and stuff. I thought that was really cool. So yeah, let's see what this article has to say further. Square Enix reinvents what Final Fantasy is with every new game, but there was a shift from Final Fantasy 13 and Type O. The series went from incorporating something popular like sci-fi in Final Fantasy 8 or medieval tropes in earlier Final Fantasies to making a trend its central focus. Final Fantasy 15 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth aren't Final Fantasies with open worlds, they're open world games with bits and pieces of Final Fantasy wrapped around them. Final Fantasy 16 isn't a dark RPG, it's a game trying to be prestige TV like Game of Thrones in interactive media form. In recent installments, Final Fantasy has over-relied on these elements to be the main part of the game's identities, which is a futile hope. When that identity is shared with so much else already, it needs more than just a set change and some Final Fantasy flavoring to feel special. In this second paragraph, what he's basically saying is that Square Enix and Final Fantasy are riding hype trains. They don't know how to make a Final Fantasy game anymore, they're just kind of making games and adding Final Fantasy elements to them. They've kind of been innovators in the JRPG scene ever since Final Fantasy 1. They haven't really had the same gameplay, so saying that they're just going after whatever's the most hype at the time is kind of reaching, in my opinion. So yeah, let's go to the next paragraph. Final Fantasy Type O is a Final Fantasy with a school game built into it. This was Square Enix hopping on the Persona bandwagon following the unexpected international success of Persona 3 and Persona 4. You've got a calendar system and classmate bonds between the main member of Class O and everyone else. Concerns are split between horrible things happening in the world and humdrum everyday life, like homework and exams. However, that's just part of it, and the school setting isn't the selling point. What Square Enix does with it is what really matters. As students of a military academy, Type O's cast gets sent out across the land to do the government's bidding. Initially, they fight in standard sorties, but as they prove more valuable to the government and become more embedded in its less savory and less sane plans, they end up faced with much more serious choices. Class O has a definitive leader, but the game is less preoccupied with its hero than most RPGs and spreads its character development around pretty equally. Everyone in class represents a different social and political background and has a unique take on what's happening around them. Type O's themes develop through this meddling of viewpoints instead of just things that happen to the hero. It's a welcome change from previous Final Fantasies, which have definitive hierarchies in terms of character significance that aren't quite as distinct in Type O. You see Square Enix try it again in Final Fantasy 15 on a smaller scale, but the story, even the bits that were properly finished, gets lost in the open world. And Final Fantasy 16 is too Clive-centric for anyone else to have room to breathe. I think it's interesting to say that Square Enix was going the Persona 3 and 4 route, because although Persona 3 and 4 are popular, I feel like Type O, in my opinion, went more of like the Kingdom Hearts route. You know, because if you play the game, it's not like Persona where you're playing a turn-based game. It's like action RPG style. Yeah, you have your different characters and they have different moves and there's like different move sets and everyone can do different magic, but you're not playing in a turn-based style. Your characters are moving, you have to make sure they're like good on health, you gotta dodge and attack, and it's kind of like more of like an action RPG. It's more of like a Kingdom Hearts type of game in my opinion. At least that's like what the UI and the gameplay and stuff felt like to me. So saying that, you know, they went for the Persona bandwagon, you know, they hyped it up, whatever, and they tried to make like a cash grab with Type O is kind of like just generalizing. I don't know. I don't think that's like accurate. So Square Enix even managed to put a nifty twist on Type O's combat. Each class member specializes in a specific kind of weapon and magic, which makes who you send into combat far more consequential here than with the Esper's Materia adventure points of earlier games. As a further little bit of strategic complexity, spell upgrades move beyond the usual, add more letters, get more power. Setup, though that's here too, takes basic spells. For example, you got RF, which launches flame bullets at enemies, and SHG, which launches flame bullets that explode. It sounds silly, but it's an important difference between higher powered single target damage and crowd control. Final Fantasy Type O's combat is occasionally too punishing, but the depth and creative iteration on what works is something Square Enix is still trying with varying degrees of success. Only now the guiding principle is what's popular and not how does this make a better game. Final Fantasy Type O was unafraid to be itself. Some of the experiments didn't work, like the real-time strategy components, which were awful. However, it's got the confidence that modern Final Fantasy games so desperately need and the determination to chart a unique path regardless of what's popular. Interesting article. Agree with some things and I disagree with other things. I think that the idea that, yes, Square Enix could have taken Type O and ran with it is very accurate. I feel like Type O is kind of like the natural progression or natural like step into Square Enix's action RPG, you know, where they were going. Square, like Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth is kind of like a better version of Type O's combat. You know, you have in Final Fantasy Remake and Rebirth characters who have a certain role. They have like a move set, they specialize in certain weapons, and then you have to switch through them to kind of defeat your enemies or make a team comp, whatever. Type O did something similar, but instead of switching from one character to another on the battlefield, you had a roster of like 14 characters, and you can have like 7 of them in your party, and you can switch out different between each of them and do like attacks and stuff depending on who you're fighting and how you're fighting. It would have been cool to see Square Enix take that concept and then put it into another Final Fantasy or a new Final Fantasy. They're like, oh yeah, instead of running with this, they went into like full action RPG with Final Fantasy 16, right? Like, I get that. And they kind of did go full action RPG where you're playing only as Clive and you don't really get to play as Jill or Sid or anyone else. And I feel like the essence of Final Fantasy then is a little missed because, in my opinion, when I hear Final Fantasy, I think, oh, this is going to be about a group. Like, I'm going to have a party. And technically I did have a party in Final Fantasy 16, but they weren't really like usable. But saying that Final Fantasy 15 and Final Fantasy 7 and even Final Fantasy 16 are just other games sprinkled with Final Fantasy elements, I feel like that's a huge stretch. But I don't think Final Fantasy 16 is trying to be something it's not. I don't think it's trying to be Game of Thrones. I think it has elements that's taken from Game of Thrones. Like the story's a little bit more gritty and stuff, but if you look back at the Ivalice Chronicles and things that took place in like that world or realm, it's always kind of been very dark. So, you know, saying that like, oh, it's trying to be a drama, like, what are you talking about, man? It's always been a drama. Like, You know, Final Fantasy 12 is Star Wars, but you don't see people saying like, oh, they're just trying to copy Star Wars. So yeah, I think like, you know, maybe we need to give Square Enix a little leg room here. I don't think they're just making games to make them, and they're not just trying to like take everyone's money like and just throw a skin over something that's already been done. I think they do actually care about the games that they're making. Have they made bad decisions? Yes, but I think they're trying to like make up for what they did, and I guess this next coming years we'll find out. Do I wish that they made a sequel to Type O? Hell yeah. You know, they had a teaser that was teasing a second game, but they never made a sequel. And I get it, it's because all the Fabula Crystalla Nova stuff that happened with Final Fantasy 13 and Final Fantasy 15 and everything that happened with all that didn't really pan out the way they wanted to, but I feel like they're trying to make up for all that. I think it's just a little too harsh to say that. I don't think they've abandoned the future of Final Fantasy just yet. They're probably, you know, getting there if they don't fix their ship. Yeah, that's what I think. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Do you think that Square Enix has abandoned Final Fantasy and the last great Final Fantasy game was Final Fantasy Type O because it tried something different but still maintained its identity? Or do you think, no, the last couple games, Final Fantasy 15, 16, and even Final Fantasy 13 are all still very much Final Fantasy games. They're just kind of packaged differently, but they have the essence of Final Fantasy. Let me know down in the comments below what you think about this article. And yeah, let's talk about it real quick. I will catch you guys later. Peace out.